When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Allie Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome to Insatiable Season 10, research-based weight loss. Rebuild your biology and psychological feedback loop. Have you ever read about the past and thought, I can't believe people actually believe that? In the 19th century, doctors thought that bloodletting could cure illnesses, and Dr. Joseph Lister was shunned for his thesis and early research proving that bacteria cause disease. While Dr. Lister was being denigrated, Charles Darwin was being celebrated, falsely claiming that women were less intelligent than men. In Darwin's time, women rarely went to advanced schooling. They needed to preserve their limited energy for baby making. Yeah, that was a thing. The 20th century wasn't immune from junk science and outrageous claims. Domino's Sugar advertised a sugar diet as a way to lose weight, touting that it had less calories per gram than fat. Cigarettes were also marketed as healthy. It sounds laughable to most of us now, but only because brave, curious thinkers were willing to question, test, and disprove the status quo in limited thinking. In Season 10 of Insatiable, research-based weight loss, rebuild your biology and psychological feedback loop, we'll explore emerging research and viewpoints, now on the periphery, that will make the current mainstream thinking of weight loss as willpower and calorie cutting look just as misguided as soothing babies and colds with morphine syrup, which, yes, was a medically endorsed thing in the Victorian era. We will explore how taking the steps towards weight loss individually and societally can be a form of resistance against the toxicity and industrialization of our food supply. We'll question the convenience of telling women that weight loss is giving in to the patriarchy and male gaze, and how this silences deeper questioning about why we all have gained so much weight and what other consequences come with this physically and mentally. We will do this by taking an integrated and holistic look at the biological and psychological feedback loop that goes into maintaining a natural weight and how our industrialized society has disrupted it. We will discuss how what you eat informs how you feel and your habits, which in turn influence what you eat as a constantly self-reinforcing infinity loop. We'll examine how culture and thus education and medical systems are not holistic and results in a siloed view of human biology and health, which allows the public and experts to continue to frame weight loss as about willpower and only about food, and how very convenient this is for those who set and profit from our industrialized agriculture policy. We laugh about Domino's Sugar diet, but the same reasoning still informs our modern dietary guidelines. Even the mainstream is noting that the Sugar Research Foundation, with the help of 3 handsomely compensated Harvard scientists in 1967, handpicked studies placing the blame on fat rather than sugar for heart disease. In 1977, one of these researchers would become the head of nutrition for the USDA and outline nutrition guidelines, enabling the low-fat weight loss craze to become a thing, and we'd all get fatter, sicker, and more depressed in the years to come. If in your gut you feel there are more important and potentially revolutionary root causes to your weight battle, or if you want to learn the viewpoint that people will likely have 50 years from now, that willpower and a simple view of calorie counting as the key to weight loss makes about as much sense as giving morphine to babies, this season is for you. Welcome to Season 10, Episode 2 of Insatiable. Food freedom number 1, stop monitoring yourself around food. So many of us monitor ourselves with food, right? We evaluate the number of points a food has, we count calories, and I don't know about you, but even if I stopped doing those diets, I could still remember how many points or calories everything was when I was fighting food. We have a judgment in our mind between, quote, good and, quote, bad foods, and thus good and bad eating days. And it starts to become an obsession, right? We feel kind of like junkies or alcoholics, but the drink or hit of choice or nemesis is the brownies in the break room or nights alone where we can just veg out with lots of food. And of course, there's a big difference where we're celebrated and encouraged to overeat and indulge on holidays and whatnot, right? Which is different than if it was really a drug addiction. And then we monitor if we look fat, and we monitor if other people are fat or thin. More scrutinization often ends in exhaustion, leading to, I know I shouldn't eat this, but F it, right? In other words, more monitoring is counterproductive. This stress is added to by the reality that our industrialized food system is addictive. And studies and research on addiction show that when our bodies are out of balance, that brownie is a drink to an alcoholic, a crack pipe to an addict. So here, more effort does not equal more reward. And what I think is interesting is we can look at a show like Mad Men, which I love, and we can be aghast that they drank so much at work, right? But I bet you in 50 years, people are going to be aghast that we had M&Ms out on our tables, that we had at the holidays, right? All of those Hershey Kisses just floating out, right? Because sugar is going to start to be seen more and more like a drug. But there is hope and a way to break these cycles. In this episode, we will grapple with the questions of how do we get out of this monitoring but not executing style? How do we rebalance our body and brain chemistry while also healing the emotional aspects of food? How do we not restrict and instead discern what is right for our physiological design? How do we feel satisfied, satiated, and healthy so that we feel great in the skin we are in and not just resigned to a body that we're really not comfortable in and doesn't feel healthy because we feel like bad feminists or otherwise shamed by the body positivity movement? So, what I discovered personally, professionally, and academically is that much of our monitoring around food and our weight is a system of our autonomic nervous system being on high alert. That's a mouthful, right? I'm going to abbreviate autonomic nervous system as ANS for short throughout this episode. We're going to be talking a lot of science here. There are transcripts available too for all episodes. So if you want to capture all of this, just go to alishapiro.com/podcast and you can get the transcript on all of this science today. But I hope to make it really accessible. So our ANS is one part of our nervous system. You are probably familiar with one of the main ANS branches, the fight or flight. Gets a lot of press, right? And yet there's also another lesser known but equally important branch of our ANS called the social engagement nervous system. So SENS, S-E-N-S for short. And that's how I'll refer to it today because it is a mouthful and we don't want this podcast to go more than 2 hours. No, I'm just kidding. It's going to be shorter than that. So our SENS stands for psychological safety. For our purposes here, think of psychological safety as having our needs met and that we can belong. To have our needs met, we have to feel like we belong. And I'll get more into belonging shortly here. This is why it can be unhelpful and impossible to integrate advice like don't care what other people think. It goes against our physiological design or need for each other. We need to care what some people think because this helps us to be interconnected and feel like we belong. Now, who those people are and in what ways is the question. If we think our weight is a problem, we often feel chronically psychologically unsafe and different, i.e. we don't belong, because we feel at risk for things like judgment, rejection, disappointment. We've been sold that thinness is this catch-all answer to minimize these types of risks. For example, if I was thin, this dating, my relationship with my sister, finding how to offer my talents would all be easier. And let's be real, because we are on this podcast, thin privilege does exist, right? We don't come up with these ideas out of nowhere. And it actually builds up this story. Yet it's also true being thin doesn't mean a struggle-free life. Thin people go to therapy, they have debt, and they struggle with feeling like they could have more meaningful lives and relationships. Now, most of us don't go around feeling socially at risk because it's not a particular feeling, but rather a way of being in the world where we are trying to be good or do the right thing, not just with food, but our life choices. Whether we are worried about what we ate, said, or did, we are most likely feeling at risk in some way. You are wondering if what you did was good or bad, right or wrong, as to not look bad, right? And you don't even realize you're doing this. Internally, we are prone to believe that looking bad leads to isolation and aloneness. And evolutionarily, from a health and survival standpoint, we need a squad out on the tundra, or at least someone to build shelter if, like me, you aren't very handy. right? Carlos and I always joke, like, if the apocalypse does happen, we're going to be the first to perish. Like, we don't know how to grow our own food. We don't know shelter. Like, we have no survival skills. Maybe that's why I'm so afraid of the apocalypse. So how does this show up for you today? Have you ever had a high school reunion or wedding coming up and you feel like you need to lose weight? This is an example of feeling at risk. Whether it's the pictures that will be shared on Facebook or how well you are doing with your life compared to others, there's a judgment risk. What will people think of me at this weight? Because if we think our weight is a metric of how great our life is, we assume others will too. And culturally, we've been conditioned to think being thin means discipline and thus success. But rather than asking, do I even care if Todd from high school thinks I've done something with my life? We focus on weight loss rather than why we aren't 100% content with what we are doing with our own life. Because when we are in alignment with our values, we have a solid sense of belonging to ourselves first and then others, and our sense doesn't need to scan for psychological safety. In other words, the weight monitoring isn't really a thing because you feel really grounded in who you are and you're connected to other people who love that about you. Our fight or flight and sense are physiological and psychological branches of our ANS, that autonomic nervous system, are an infinity feedback loop to keep us holistically safe. When we feel threatened, real or perceived, and this is the key, real or perceived, it's not always true, they are activated and we experience this as self-monitoring or analysis. So to repeat, self-monitoring around food and our weight is a symptom that your ANS is activated because you have physical or psychological needs that aren't being met. So that's the root cause, not the monitoring is the symptom. So what specifically turns on the alarm bells of these two branches? Let's start with the physiological threats, which is the fight or flight branch is for. It is more ancient, is still reacting to old evolutionary threats, famine or a saber-toothed tiger. I always like to think of it as like the 1.0 beta model, really good beta model, but 1.0. And the evolution is pretty slow process. And there hasn't been any software updates in the past 100 or couple thousands of years of agricultural and then industrialized society. So I want to focus on when the body registers a famine and how it activates our fight or flight response for this episode. Because often when we assume we're hungry, we think we're weak rather than there's some real root causes of why we have hunger, cravings, and anxiety and depression. The body's trying to get our attention. So the body assumes famine mode, which is also fat storage mode, and activates our fight or flight response for three root causes. First, being overfed and malnourished. This is a recent phenomenon of our industrialized food system. Here, we are eating enough calories, but our body doesn't have the right nutrients to do all it needs to keep the lights on. And our food supply is now organized so that we are having an addiction response to foods that throw out the balance and ultimately damage our physical and mental health. What you need to remember is calories and nutrition aren't the same. Number two, we get in fight or flight response when we are not eating the right foods for your body. There isn't one way of eating that is best for everybody. And I think more people are starting to catch on to this. We have all the research that's mounting to prove this, that we all have unique nutrient needs based on our genetics and the environments and experiences we have been exposed to. So you may be hearing more of the term of bioindividuality to describe this. Here, you might be getting enough nutrition, but the wrong kind. So one thing I see often is people cut carbs too much, and so they're still hungry. So instead, they're eating more fat, let's say, but really they need some carbs. So that's an example. Cutting calories too drastically to lose weight is the third root cause of activating our fight or flight. While it works in the short term, long term, the body will bounce back with voracious hunger because it doesn't know food is plentiful and creates new nutrient deficiencies and nutritional imbalances. This makes dieting itself one of the biggest root causes of weight gain, as research shows that both undereating and overeating suggest to the body we have a famine. Either go find food or metabolically, it's time to store fat because we don't know when food is coming again. Specifically, researchers identified a protein, RAGE. That's right, rage, like Rage Against the Machine, that shuts down animals' ability to burn fat in times of bodily stress. Who says researchers don't have a sense of humor? Some of them are my clients. They do, and they're great. Bodily stress includes starvation and overeating. Historically, overeating signaled to our ancestors' bodies that food was scarce, making gaining weight a survival mechanism. If we think of seasonal living, this is what used to happen to our ancestors in winter and what many animals do currently before they hibernate. Activating our fight or flight nervous system dries up hunger and cravings while simultaneously storing fat. So here's how. Physiologically, when the fight and flight branch of our ANS is activated, our body releases stored glucose so we can fight or flight. Stored glucose is the food we've eaten before, because whether it's a famine or a saber-toothed tiger, girl, you need your energy. In today's world, we don't have to go out and find corn or kale. We have corn and kale chips and or breakfast or meals that the night before likely had more starch and sugar than could have ever been found in the natural world, further confusing your body and hunger signals. So say you eat breakfast and find yourself already hungry at 10:30 or you have cravings at 3 p.m. Most of the time, this is from not eating the right foods or enough food. Many people don't eat enough food during the day and are super hungry at night. Then they overeat at night, and this keeps the cycle going because then they don't get hungry for breakfast, and the cycle continues. Whether from not enough food or the wrong foods, your body senses the emergency of malnourishment and turns on its fight or flight system, so you will go find more food. And it's an emergency to be malnourished. Because you don't need to use a lot of energy to find food, you eat again, and whatever energy isn't used to go find food is now floating around in your system. This excess energy feels like a winning lottery ticket to your body, which stores it as fat. And the double kicker is now you've emptied your energy stores, making us hungry or, quote, craving something is how this often we experience this in everyday life, because we have to replenish these stores for the next fight or flight event. We experience this as chasing blood sugar highs and lows and an increase of fat storage. You may feel like you're a bad dieter, you continue to monitor your food, and then society tells you you have a willpower problem. Hashtag infuriating. I can't believe I'm 41 and I'm thinking in hashtags. Okay. Or maybe your body positivity tells you you have better things to do with your time than watch your food and weight. And I totally agree. And also think that it shouldn't be a struggle to feel good in your body. And if you are, you might be eating out of alignment with your physiological design. Your body is lovingly trying to get your attention, and ignoring these feelings as certain interpretations of body positivity may not be honoring your body and yourself the way the movement intended, right? The movement's been co-opted from its original roots, which is often the case with any movement. We don't need to spend more time on food and weight. We need to spend quality time figuring out our bodies so we can set it and forget it. Because when you eat the right foods, quantity and quality for your body, the monitoring and thinking about food goes down drastically, as often does the scale. So what are the right foods for our bioindividuality? I have found the work of Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez to be a foundational framework for guiding clients to start really hearing their body's own biofeedback. His work focuses on balancing or calming our autonomic nervous system. Dr. Gonzalez was a renegade force in the health world. He was originally an investigative journalist and turned these discernment skills for the truth into a medical career where he was keeping pancreatic cancer patients alive for 25 years with his protocols when Western medicine ran out of options. His nutrition guidance came from understanding that when it comes to our autonomic nervous system, some of us are sympathetic dominant, meaning we're more likely to go in fight or flight under stress. Some of us are parasympathetic dominant, more likely to go to rest and relaxation dominant. And some of us are balanced, so we'll go between the two systems. I'm going to give a very high-level overview and how I've adapted this for people who aren't dealing with cancer, but may have different chronic health issues like Hashimoto's or depression and anxiety. The goal in his theory is to harmonize our nervous system with the right foods in the same way Ayurveda is about harmonizing your dosha, or Chinese medicine is about harmonizing where you have energy stagnation. For those who are sympathetic dominant, their bodies are more acidic. A vegetarian diet will stimulate the parasympathetic and suppress the sympathetic, which is what these people need as their fight or flight gets activated more easily. These are also the people who, under stress and imbalance with their diets, are more likely to project their anger toward the outside world. Think of Donald Trump, who, as we know, he likes burgers, fries, and Diet Coke. Now, I'm not saying a vegetarian diet is going to heal all that he has going on. Clearly, no food has that much healing power. But that's an example of someone extremely out of balance. For those who are parasympathetic dominant, they need a higher animal and fat content diet, which we think of as more paleo or keto today, to stimulate their sympathetic system and suppress their parasympathetic. Under stress, these people are more likely to emotionally turn inwards and blame themselves and thus get more depressed than angry under stress. They are often the artists, like musicians, entrepreneurs, or creative strategic thinkers who are visionary leaders in their nonprofit and for-profit roles. That's how I see it with my clients, how it shows up. Those who are balanced do best with the mix, what we think of as Mediterranean, to keep their balance going. And those people can toggle between the two and still feel good. Now, each nervous system type has a different blood sugar sensitivity. So, for example, parasympathetic dominant people, these are who we tend to think of more as the artists and people who are more prone to depression than anger. They tend towards hypoglycemia and brain fog. And this is totally me. If I don't have animal protein or fat at most meals, I crash and get very spacey. Like when Carlos and I, if we're going to have an argument, we both are like kind of joke. It's like, do we each need protein? Because we both need protein to get back into feeling calm again. If you're interested in more specifics of why I find this dietary theory and the multiple decades of research it's based on, yes, Dr. Gonzalez synthesized research from I think it started hundreds of years ago of different thought theories. It's not just like one study here or there. You can read his book. It's a great book to start with, is Nutrition in the Autonomic Nervous System, the scientific foundation of the Gonzalez protocol. Now, this is not a consumer-oriented book. Doesn't mean if you aren't a medical professional, you won't enjoy it, but it's definitely written more for a lot of medical professionals. And I know a lot of you listen to the show, so I can't recommend that book enough. Again, that is the Nutrition and the Autonomic Nervous System, the scientific foundation of the Gonzalez protocol. What I learned from myself and where I like to start with clients is focusing on what types of proteins work for them. This helps clear the waters, as the biofeedback system can get so muddied when we aren't eating the right foods for ourselves. And it's a great way for clients to start understanding the quality of our macronutrients. Proteins, fats, and carbs matter as much as the quantity. And again, this is connecting how we eat affects our energy and moods. This is about feeling good and making life easier for ourselves, not to be good to please other people. To be healthy in our world today, many of us who have had to eat a certain way for our health and have to learn to place what we need in importance over what people think about the way we eat. It can feel isolating, not people-pleasing, but there is a way to do it that feels right for you, and we'll discuss this throughout the season, and that is a building block of the Truth with Food process. I experienced this myself in the late 90s. Much of the mainstream thinking was that cancer survivors like me needed to eat vegetarian to keep cancer at bay again. So I started with all the fake soy dogs and patties and ate a lot of those in college. But I was always hungry and thought that pushing through hungry was part of the game. But my body intuitively knew the more nuanced dietary theories of today, even though I didn't know them at the time, like Dr. Gonzalez's, that show blood cancers like mine, which I had Hodgkin's, leukemia, all of us in that family of cancers, actually do better with meat and fat diets, which we know of as ketogenic today. As South Beach rose in popularity at the time, and I was failing at my weight loss battle as a vegetarian, I tried this diet and learned the importance of blood sugar control. With this diet, I had so much less hunger and sugar cravings with meat as protein compared to all the fake vegetarian protein I was eating. I also realized that if I had a tofu dish, I was still hungry and just categorized tofu as not filling me up. And now I understand why. It wasn't registering with my body. But at the same time, I just knew I needed to add meat into my diet because it dawned on me, if I feel healthy today, I will eat less sugar, and this improved my chances of being healthy tomorrow. This realization was even more powerful than my knowledge that cancer fed on sugar, which could not stop me from binging upon it with unbalanced blood sugar. This is what worked for me. Whereas I had one client, we will call her Sarah, and that's not her real name. She is more sympathetic dominant. She is a classic sympathetic dominant. She's type A, she's a partner at a big law firm, has 2 kids, husband, she has some hot side hustles. She's always on the go. And her nervous system supports this type of lifestyle, right? That's energizing to her. She intuitively felt better with more vegan and vegetarian foods and always gravitated towards that. Yet when we started working together, she was following a celebrity nutritionist who was correct in advocating for blood sugar balance. And the nutritionist's plan was to include meat to do this. However, based on the Gonzalez protocol and even more emerging research, which shows foods like meat raise people's blood sugars to different degree, a one-size-fits-all to blood sugar balance doesn't work. We've worked to fine-tune her natural intuitive feedback loop by getting her back to more vegetarian diet with some tweaks, because the autonomic nervous system balance framework is on a continuum And most of us aren't purely vegetarian or keto or Mediterranean. Previously, a reinforcing feel-good cycle never occurred to me or most of my clients because we think losing weight and getting healthy is about discipline, deprivation, and monitoring. Discovering if you need animal protein or not is a foundational piece to hearing your biofeedback loop. This will begin to balance your autonomic nervous system and reduce your food monitoring. I'll share with you an easy way to figure this out for yourself at the end of the episode. Okay. That was a lot of science. So let's take a break and hear a word from our sponsor. Do you want to get to the root cause of why you fight food and struggle with your weight? Do you want to figure out what foods work best for you and rewrite the story that causes you to fall off track with your eating? Do you want to feel in control of food with more freedom and fewer rules? If so, my annual flagship Truce with Food program is tailor-made for you. In this boutique, small group experience, you have the best of both worlds, my individualized attention and the accelerated learning curve that comes from growing and learning with others, so you can put yourself on a track to a sustainable, healthy weight for you. To learn more, including hearing client stories and why they consider this program life-saving and life-changing, visit alishapiro.com/truce with food. And for our 2020 group, use the coupon code EARLYBIRD to save $500 if you register by Monday, February 17th. Registration opens Monday, February 10th. Hope to see as many insatiable listeners there. Okay, now switching gears or branches to the SENS branch of our ANS. This is more recent evolution, and we are talking thousands of years recent. This part of our nervous system scans to see if we are socially safe, i.e., do we belong? We needed to belong as we evolved because we wouldn't have survived without each other. Imagine being a one-woman band out in the tundra or desert, or in modern day terms, as I'm learning, as a mom. You are not gonna survive, girl. What's interesting here is that when we perceive we are socially safe, our fight or flight system is turned off, and we prevent that entire hunger craving fat storage inducing cascade. This happens when our social and emotional needs are met. An everyday example of that is why we feel more hungry when we're stressed at work, right? We have a social and emotional need to do a good job and look like we're doing a good job. However, when we've been through trauma, our focus often has to shift to make sure others' social and emotional needs were met. And so we've continued those patterns and behaviors today. 90% of us will experience trauma, and many of us won't realize it. Trauma isn't just being assaulted, it's also being bullied, worrying about our children's safety in school from gun violence, a toxic boss, a bad breakup or divorce, or growing up in a divorced household, and a list of other things that we've normalized. But our trauma doesn't destine us to unhealthy coping patterns or behaviors because we can also use it for post-traumatic growth. And we talk more about that in episode 1. So if you're interested in that research, you can listen to episode 1 of the season. So to do this, we need to shift the focus to first belong to our own needs, wants, and values, which takes us from protective patterns like black and white thinking to creative and generative choices and outcomes. So for example, can we say how we honestly feel? Can we eat what is right for us but different from our family and be met with empathy and respect for our choices? In body positivity and intuitive eating, the focus is on feeling safe in our bodies regardless of what they weigh. I totally agree with that. And ... I think we need to go further to address the original root causes of why our weight became so important, because there are most likely unresolved trauma and belonging issues, and thus patterns and behaviors that continue to isolate us, preventing the belonging we need to grow into ourselves. When we truly belong, we are seen and appreciated for who we are, our gifts, talents, and wounds. Our wounds are where the magic is. That's what makes us individual and can contribute to society, our special sauce. It is in this place that weight doesn't matter. If we feel not enough or too much, we don't feel safe in who we are, and thus our SENS is monitoring what other people need, perpetuating a vicious cycle of depriving ourselves of what we need while building up that weight loss is going to help us be the real, most powerful us. When our belonging is in question, like when we wonder if we look heavy, which assumes our weight determines if we belong or not, or assume we are rocking the boat for asking what we need at work, our SENS is now activated, which also turns on your fight or flight, which turns the dial on your monitoring up even more. And the more the dial is turned up, the more anxiety you feel. This monitoring extends to wherever and whenever we aren't clear if we are socially safe. So if you're going to a new gym, right? Is everyone judging me? If you have a horrible or a new boss, a new job, dating, the list can go on depending upon your story. When an identity you feel keeps you safe is challenged, you will call it stress or overwhelm. And for those of us who use food, we'll often use that to cope because we haven't developed the resilience skills we need to manage stress and pursue the life opportunities and experiences we most deeply want. We give that imagined power of resilience to weight loss, telling ourselves this will be easier if I was thinner. Feeling like skinny is magic is giving our power to weight loss instead of cultivating resilience, which is truly what facilitates more ease in how we live our lives, because we aren't destabilized by every curveball that happens, and we can go the distance in what we want for our lives because we know we can rise to the challenge. So for example, just the other day, I was trying to get Essa, my son, it still feels amazing to say that and crazy at the same time. I was trying to get him to nap the other day after 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep from the night before. In other words, I was exhausted. I am someone who needs a lot of sleep. And so I'm rocking him, I'm hushing him, I'm getting to sleep, and I caught my silhouette in the window. And it occurred to me that the old me would have thought, oh, this will be so much easier once you lose all your pregnancy weight. And the healed me was like, nope, having a newborn is challenging. I'm new to this mother identity. I'm new to Essa. And I need to focus on getting more resilient with this challenge, not lose weight. And the great thing is I haven't worried about losing my pregnancy weight at all. But that is an example of what the old me would have thought when I saw my silhouette. So we need to love our bodies and take back the power weight loss has in our life, where it's not about food or our weight. In my weight, I discovered that what activates our sons is our story about what it takes to belong where we want to belong, whether that's doing meaningful work in a relationship with the people we want to be in relationship with, or even feeling comfortable like that we belong at the gym. And in the same way we think we need to be deprived and work so hard to eat well and lose weight, we think belonging is about monitoring to make others comfortable, happy, and or keep the peace. In this process, we often ignore our own needs. Even if you identify like a rebel like me, which most of you, well, I shouldn't assume, but most of my clients do, and they actually want to be more rebellious, there's a way to be a rebel, right? So for example, for much of my life, I identified as a tomboy. I was really close with my dad. I played sports. We had that was a big bond we had. And I'm still not very what we think of as girly. But this was different than the other girls I grew up around. And so I would always talk sports with guys because I thought that's what they wanted to talk about. But the night I met Carlos, I wasn't trying to get him to like me. So I didn't feel like I had to make, quote, good conversation. Instead, okay, geek alert, when I learned he was working for AARP and he was on, for people new to the show, Carlos is a writer and editor. So I found out he was working for AARP and he was working on Social Security and Medicare Part D, the politics, an article about that. AARP is non-political, but this was 2005. We started talking politics and social issues, which is what I really love to talk about. So he later told me part of why he asked for my number that night was because of how active my mind was. And I find it hilarious that Carlos isn't a sports person at all. I've actually had to teach him about some sports. But my sense wasn't activated because I wasn't in a defensive, I need to prove myself position, or, oh, I hope he'll like me, which is the defensive position, feeling like we need to earn our worth. And by actually conversing about what I love to think about, we created a different kind of connection than had I tried to talk about sports. I didn't have the language or understanding to realize that in uncertain situations where my story was active, I was ignoring my needs and stereotyping others so they would be most comfortable or happy. So when I talked about perceived psychological safety, we often stereotype others and try to adapt what we think they want when we are not really even sure. So when our story is active, we will feel unsafe and experience more monitoring, not only around food and weight, but of others and what we perceive they want and need. So we do all this monitoring, but because we were paying attention to our food and not these invisible patterns of behaviors, we keep thinking food is our problem. For example, when I was in my corporate job, national and international travel were particularly ripe times for my stress eating. I would always promise myself, oh, I'll get back on track when I'm not traveling so much. Looking back, because again, I didn't know my story was active when I was telling myself this, it is shocking to me, as someone who has always felt confident in a lot of ways, to discover how much I monitored myself in situations that challenged an identity that I had about myself. I was conscious I was monitoring my food when I was traveling for work, but I was unconscious my stress was about feeling like I belonged in a job that looked good with international travel, and I had incredible responsibility for a young 20-something. But I didn't know I was trying to protect any identities because I just didn't even have language for that. In my mind, I just thought that I was always trying to do the right thing to be successful. I had no idea that the right or good thing and successful were opinions I held, not an absolute truth of what is right and successful. In the case with my work travel, I really didn't belong in that environment, not because I couldn't hack it, but because it was a mismatch of values. And so I felt distance from the common vision and goals we were all working towards. I felt out of place, not in an insecure way, but just distanced and disconnected from others. My stress was, this job looks so great and it has its benefits, and I feel out of place here. Like, am I the only one not drinking the company Kool-Aid? But I'd always been the good girl, which I defined as doing what was responsible. I always took on the challenge. This included doing the honors college at Penn State, called the Schreier's Honors College. I took on the challenging corporate job, even moving to Paris when I didn't speak French as part of that job, because I was like, I can do this. I took a lot of risks in the areas I felt confident in and was generally applauded and rewarded for these risks. But I did not take risks so much in the areas that I didn't have a lot of practice. So I couldn't understand why I was feeling different in these environments, from the corporate job to dating to et cetera, et cetera. And it was a chronic tension, which is why I would eat when I was stressed or bored from work. It was the same root cause, just dressed in a different outfit. That was where my story was the most active for me in my job. You know, it wasn't horrible. I questioned the meaning of it, but I felt like I wasn't really living up to my potential of where my gifts and talents were. So one way, going to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, which was my first nutrition school, this was unconsciously challenging my story and my, quote, responsible identity. To go to IIN, which is, again, Institute for Integrative Nutrition, I had to sell my car. It wasn't going to further my corporate career, and it was very woo for that time in my life. I'm someone who's very pragmatic, and I want to know the science. Yet going there, so I just went there purely for the satisfaction and fulfillment of it. It had, in other words, it wasn't going to do anything to help my responsible identity. If anything, it looked quite irresponsible in how I was defining responsible at the time. Yet when I went there, my eating got better, even with the New York City travel and the exhaustion from sleeping at my friend's pull-out couch, who lived in New York City. And she lived, you know, I would sleep on her pull-out couch and hear the New York City traffic all night. But my eating was still better despite all that travel. I lived in Philly at the time, and you may be thinking, oh, it was only a train or bus ride away. Correct. And I was working a full-time job, you know, no downtime, not getting any sleep on the weekends, and being really stimulated constantly by going to school on the weekends. But my eating got better because I started to connect with my values of curiosity, love of learning, and rebellion. So it wasn't about my job stress. It was about not belonging first to my values, which led to not feeling like I belonged at work. And again, I had a ton of friends at work, but belonging is deeper than being like you're connected. It's expressing our values and being seen for those values. It's if you have coworkers, you're like, oh, I just love seeing that person, or I trust that person. And, you know, I had a couple of those people, but we still couldn't cultivate all that we really valued because we were just in a different environment. It wasn't right or wrong. It was just out of alignment for me. But for others, this lack of belonging will show up in our social lives. So for example, if you feel like you've been good all night at a party and then you have an awkward conversation with someone, you might suddenly feel like you can't say no to the dessert table. You may think it's because you love dessert, but if you look deeper, you might find it's because you now have all these doubts about if you said the right thing. Or if you're going to a party you totally don't want to be at, where you will feel totally out of place because you no longer drink, you might start monitoring what you can eat there from the start because the uncertainty and doubt about how to be sober around drinking people. The uncertainty is chronic, thus, so is the monitoring of food. And the same way we often turn to prepackaged foods, when we are in our story, we turn to prepackaged choices that we learned were safe, most likely as kids or teenagers, rather than the parts of ourselves that need to be seen and respected. And remember, if you are parasympathetic dominant, which a lot of my clients are, i.e. you do better with paleo or keto diets, you will be more likely to turn inward on yourself when you are in your story, making story revision work vitally important in preventing a depressive spiral. I'll give you two client examples of successfully satisfying their sense system to prevent their fight or flight system and fat storage from being activated. A client I'll call Lindsay, not her real name. None of these names are real unless my client allowed me to use their name for real. But a client I'll call Lindsay moved to a new town for a job. And she had a few friends she made out at work who were her initial social circle there because she didn't know anyone in the town. And these two friends were vegan. And when she was out with them, she would order a vegan meal because she told me, I just don't feel like getting into it with them about how I only feel better with meat. So she was accommodating their perceived needs of only eating with other vegan people to avoid perceived judgment and not getting her needs met. So her homework was to order a meat dish, which is what she needed to keep her blood sugar balanced while out to eat with them next, sharing what she discovered about her need for meat after trying to be a vegetarian and her interest in buying from sustainable farms so that she was actually supporting a different way of raising meat, that one that is actually sustainable. This resulted in a great conversation about bioindividuality, and even one friend went on to share that her sugar cravings had been out of control since she went vegan. So bringing this side of herself to the group facilitated a deeper sense of safety in the relationship that she felt then at work and socially, right? So initially she was trying to avoid to keep the peace, the perceived peace, and the judgment. And then when she shared who she really was and what she was learning, it supported that type of belonging. And so then she didn't have cravings from physical sugar balance, and she felt safer at work and socially. Or what should I say? More like you have a community is often how it feels in our everyday life. Another example is a client I'll call Gina. She had been accidentally copied on an email where she was mentioned and some sexist things were said. She could feel the adrenaline of fight or flight response as she read the email. She wanted to say something, but then she wondered, would she rock the boat? Am I being too sensitive? But it really bothered her. Normally, she would have eaten to procrastinate on how to respond. She identified that when she feels like she just needs something food-wise, she's usually avoiding making a choice. We were well into our work together, and now she recognized she was avoiding honoring her need to rectify the sexist assumption. She waited a day to respond so she could think more clearly and respond diplomatically about the sexist remarks and better ways of thinking about her and other women. She sent the email to the person who had made the remarks, and he was grateful for her clarity and saw her points. Acknowledging what was true for her deepened the relationship versus causing more conflict, which was her fear based on her story. Not only does she not feel funny around him at work anymore, they are actually a better team together, which heals and reinforces a new story where it's safe for her to have needs. And in this case, her need was to have her voice heard because that honored her values. Becoming aware of our story and patterns, and then thoughtfully and intentionally making different choices and responses helps us belong to ourselves. This and sharing with other people puts the sens at ease and results in less social monitoring of ourselves and others, and will prevent the fight, flight, fat storage cascade in our bodies. Long-term, weight loss as, quote, the answer decreases as we make life easier and more fulfilling independent of what we weigh. When we have enough of a sense of belonging or psychological safety, we actually become body neutral, as our bodies aren't really central to how we interact. We can feel positive, negative, or both about our bodies, depending on the day, and it's not going to affect how we approach the world. Ironically, this also makes it easier to lose weight and feel healthy in your skin. So rather than trying to find a better plan to organize our food, like a different diet or learning more about nutrition or dismissing our food obsession as unhealthy and part of diet culture's tentacles for us to feel unworthy, we need to address the root causes and learn to balance or calm our autonomic nervous system's fight or flight and sens branches so we stop being on high alert or monitoring our food and bodies all the time. A first step to do this physically is to try my guided breakfast experiment that is in the show notes of this podcast episode. Again, you can go to alishapiro.com/podcast and you can access this breakfast experiment. Here I walk you through an exercise to try 2 breakfasts, one without animal protein and one with. I have developed this for my clients as a starting point to understand where they are on the vegan, vegetarian, paleo, keto continuum, and to identify what to look for in your own biofeedback loop to help you evaluate what works best for your body instead of subscribing to prepackaged ideas of good and bad foods. From a story perspective, next time you're in a social situation where you feel like your weight is a thing, ask yourself, where do I feel at risk for saying, doing, being the wrong thing? And the wrong thing will be what's different from the norms of the situation, making you feel out of place. And remember, it could be values like I found in my corporate job. Or for example, on a more daily basis, if you're at the gym and you find yourself monitoring your body, in what ways do you feel like you don't belong there? Are you wondering if you can keep up in the group exercise class? Do you think you should stand in the back to not be noticed versus wanting to be in the front where you can see and hear the instructor better? Are you wondering if you don't know how to use the machines correctly or not wearing the right gym gear for that type of workout? Simply becoming aware and connecting this monitoring to feeling socially at risk in this way is critical. Many of my clients are confident or secure in certain areas of their life. It's a shock for them to see how often they have these doubts beyond food and their body. And if you want a bonus homework assignment, ask someone how to use the machines. Take a break in the group exercise class when you need it. Stand in the front of the class so you can hear and see better. Or leave early if you have to. Whatever you want to do and feel like you shouldn't or can't, try it and see what happens. Each time we choose to show up as we are and discover it's safe, i.e. nothing happens, or a trainer enthusiastically gets to explain how a machine works because they love supporting people in their health goals, we retrain our senses to be less defensive and more discerning about where it is safe to be who we are and who we are becoming. This doesn't happen overnight, but develops over time with practice, just like a muscle. But unlike a fad diet, it's a skill and way of being that won't be lost once learned and will help you move towards more ease around your food, health, and weight. So, conclusion and summary of this episode, because it was a lot, but I hope it gives you some things to think about. Monitoring our food, weight, and cells is a symptom our ANS is activated. Our ANS has a fight or flight branch and a social engagement branch. The fight or flight is activated when we are malnourished yet overfed from processed foods, not eating the right foods for our body, or cutting calories too drastically for too long. The SENS is on high alert when we feel socially unsafe or at risk for judgment, rejection, etc., which is often when we are afraid of when we are uncomfortable with our weight. This lack of physical and psychological safety, real or perceived, turns on the fight or fight fat storage cascade. To begin to calm your ANS and reduce how much you monitor your food, weight, and self, eat the right macronutrients to start to calm your famine trigger. Starting with whether or not you need animal protein can help to provide significant clarity in your biofeedback loop. Practice becoming aware of when you feel socially at risk or unsafe by noticing when you monitor yourself and others. This is a clue you're in a story about what it takes to belong where you want to belong. Even rebels need belonging. Regardless of how confident you feel, begin to connect your weight and non-hunger food monitoring to your story. Ask yourself, where do I feel at risk for saying, doing, being the wrong thing? And the wrong thing will often be what's different from the norms of the situation, making you feel out of place or alone. All right. Enjoy digesting this, and then tune in next week in the episode where we're going to talk about how to start recognizing your needs and choices, especially because they are often hiding in plain sight when we discuss how to get back in control of food. Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health and our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.